This is the Play Your Position podcast, where we huddle up, call the plays, and inspire you to run your ball into the end zone. Are you ready to score more game-winning touchdowns in your life, business, and career? Then listen up, because it's game time, baby. Now, here's your host, Mary Lou Kaiser.
They bet it all on Jordan. Hey everyone, it's Mary Lou Kaiser. Welcome to today's episode of the Play Your Position podcast. I'm going solo today and we'll be talking about some leadership insights I picked up from watching a fantastic movie the other night on Amazon Prime called Air. It features Matt Damon, Ben Affleck, Jason Bateman, and Viola Davis, and it tells a story about how Nike landed Michael Jordan for their line of basketball sneakers way back in the dark ages of the 1980s. And there are several reasons I love this movie. The first is because it's just a great story. The acting is fantastic. It shares a slice of history that many of us lived through. I was still a teenager when Michael Jordan started his NBA career, and I remember when Air Jordans first came out. And no, I didn't have the foresight to invest in any pairs of Air Jordans and then stash them away in plastic so that 40 years later I could make a killing in the sneakerhead market, right? If only I had known. And I lived in Oregon for many, many years, raised my kids there. It's truly my home. Temporarily away from it right now. I basically lived 4 miles from Nike World Headquarters. I actually met Phil Knight with my son's Little League team back in, 2010 or 11 or something like that. Great guy. It was so much fun to go to World Headquarters. And I have friends who have worked for Nike over the years, and I have friends who still work for Nike now. So there was a lot connecting me to this movie, but on a broader scale, on a more universal scale, and why I'm talking about it today is another reason, which is it showcases the real struggles leaders face with respect to making big decisions. And I'm going to talk about those in a minute, specific decisions that the characters in this movie had to make that are tied directly to answering the call to leadership. But first, let me share the final reason I want to talk about the movie Air is because every now and then something in the popular culture comes along like this film that just makes you stop and think about how life is always moving forward. It reminds us that we get used to things the way they are and we think, they've always been this way, right? And then a story like this comes along and you realize, no, things don't ever stay the same. Nike was not always huge for basketball the way it is today. Now, it was doing well when Michael Jordan came along, but they were on the brink of closing the entire basketball division because they weren't living up to the endorsements that their competitors, Adidas and Converse, were enjoying at the time. Back then, Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, these were the big names, and they were with other companies. And that's one of the central tensions of the story. And I'm not going to spoil the whole story for you because I really, really encourage you to go watch it. What I want to talk about now is leadership and some of these amazing leadership lessons that for me were so readily apparent and so powerful and great reminders of the journey that I as a leader am on. And I know the journey my guests and you guys, Team PYP, are on as well. Well, Phil Knight is the founder and CEO of Nike, and he plays a central role in this story, but he really isn't the star. A man named Sonny Vaccaro, who Matt Damon plays in the movie, he is the main character of this tale. Now, Sonny's character showcases the idea that when we believe in something so fully, so deeply, anything can be possible. And on a side note, if you've ever heard of Phil Knight's memoir, Shoe Dog, that's a book I highly recommend reading because it tells the story of Nike from his point of view. This movie really is telling one piece of Nike's story through the character of Sonny Vaccaro, who was instrumental in getting Michael Jordan to Nike and changing the face of everything, which I'll talk about here in a minute. One of the things a question I wanted to ask you is, have you ever noticed or experienced that when big wins in our lives come along, it's because we were willing to stay true to what we believed was the right decision, even if making that decision terrified us? Well, that's what happens for Sonny. He was an experienced talent scout for high school and college basketball players. He spent a lot of time traveling around, watching film, watching live games, developing relationships with coaches, and getting a sense of players and what their potential was for the NBA. He had a feeling about Jordan, and he stayed with it because Jordan wasn't the obvious choice. He was overlooked by a lot of teams, including the Portland Trail Blazers, who to this day still have a big black eye from not picking Jordan and taking Sam Bowie. But that's a whole different story. I'm not going to go down that lane. I want to stick with this one. So Sonny's belief in Jordan drove him. He became obsessed with getting Jordan to Nike, and he would not let outsiders talk him out of his belief. He didn't back down, even though betting it all on Jordan was a huge, huge risk for Nike, and nobody wanted to do that. Now, we all know that leadership is tinged with risk. When you're playing big, you're going to take some big chances, and you're going to place some big bets. And Sonny was a gambler, and he understood that a big bet can mean a big payout, or it can mean a tremendous, heartbreaking loss. So with any bet, that's the case, right? Big or small, but the bigger the bet, the greater the win and greater the loss. And prior to getting Jordan, Nike had $250,000 earmarked for some players who would represent their basketball shoe line. That was the deal. Now, back in 1984, $250K was a lot of money, and they were going to split it three ways between three players. And one of the players they were considering was Charles Barkley, and he ended up not, getting picked, obviously. Nike, of course, wanted Jordan, but knew they couldn't afford him since both Converse and Adidas had already offered him $250K exclusively. And again, the $250K at Nike was earmarked for three players, not one. And Sonny he could not shake this feeling he had about Jordan. He understood talent, and he could tell that Jordan was different, that Jordan was going to change the game of basketball forever, which we all now know he did. And he points this out in conversations with his friend Rob Strasser, who was a marketing executive with Nike at the time. And he and Sonny were friends. And, in all fairness, they could see the writing on the wall that things just weren't happening in the basketball division at Nike. And, so here comes Sonny with this crazy idea to let's just go after Jordan, forget the others. Let's just offer him the $250K. And he talks about this with Rob Strasser. He talks about this with Phil Knight as well. And in every situation, he's met with a ton of resistance. In 1984, Nike was already a billion-dollar brand, but they had built that billion-dollar brand on running shoes. And that was Phil Knight's baby, his love, because he himself was a runner. He had attended the University of Oregon, go Ducks, where he met Bill Bowerman, who was his co-founder, and they invented running shoes using a waffle iron to construct the soles of the shoes. I don't know how many of you listening know that little tidbit about Nike, but that's what they did. They took a waffle iron, and they were manufacturing in the back of Bill Bowerman's car these soles that they then slapped on to shoes, running shoes of the time, because the waffle iron made the grip. And they put them on different athletes' feet and off to the races. Haha, no pun intended, or maybe I did. There they go, right? And that was in 1964, almost 60 years ago. The name of the company was Blue Ribbon Sports. That was the original name for Nike. In the movie, there's a small scene where some characters discuss about why Nike became Nike, and I'll let you watch the movie to find out the answer to that, because I want to keep talking about this big decision and its relationship to leadership. So Nike was 20 years old when Jordan showed up, and they were doing pretty well, all things considered. But as far as market share went, in the basketball division, they were lagging behind Adidas and Converse. Now, Phil Knight, incredibly competitive, he did not like being behind the competition. He wanted to see the numbers go up, but at the same time, he'd gotten comfortable. He wasn't playing all out the way he did in the beginning. And there's some conversations throughout the film about, I remember the days when I knew everybody who worked here, Sonny would say. And, big companies become bigger and bigger, and they change. And so with that, Phil Knight had got a little comfortable. He wasn't as willing to take the risks. And then along comes Sonny Vaccaro with this crazy idea to offer Jordan the whole sum and to do it in a way that wasn't conventional. And this is another one of the big takeaways from the movie for me. The idea that to get anywhere in life, we have to do things differently. The status quo just won't get you there. Unconventional thinking and unconventional action leads to unconventional and oftentimes incredible results. Results that you could never have imagined prior to something happening, right? Sonny's suggestion of going all in on Jordan was disruptive, and it scared everybody because it was a huge bet. And what was at risk was the basketball division going under. It wasn't just the $250K. It wasn't just losing the opportunity to get 3 players. It was lives on the line, people's livelihoods, their families, their children, their mortgages, their ability to pay their bills. And that bet didn't pan out, everything would go away in the basketball division. It would poof, all gone. And Sonny knew this. But then along comes Phil Knight, who at first resisted the idea, and then he changes his mind. We see a scene. He goes out for a long run, and he comes back, and you can see he realizes Sonny might be onto something. And so he says, listen, Sonny, you're remembered for the rules you break. You're remembered for the rules you break. And I think that is such a poignant line, because if we don't take risks, if we don't break rules that we already know what those rules are, right? We're going to live lives of quiet desperation. As Henry David Thoreau was so famous for saying way back in the 1850s, he was looking around at all the people in the Boston area and the Concord area and all the materialism that was going on and all the change that was going on because of railroads. And we were on the cusp of the Civil War in this country. Materialism was alive and well. So were all the social problems that we see played out on social media today. It's just we dress in different clothes and we have different tools to do it. But the same problems continue to plague humanity. Okay? So, if we're not willing to step outside of what's conventional, we're just going to stay in that very mediocre, very vanilla track. And this is one of the reasons why movies like Air are so important, in my opinion. They show us a slice of history. They teach us things about life, including the idea that nothing of value comes without risk. Nothing of value comes without thinking differently, and nothing of value happens if you don't believe in something with every fiber of your being, the way Sonny believed in Michael Jordan. Because after Jordan signed with Nike, everything changed. everything. Yes, Nike made billions of dollars and continues to make billions of dollars every year. But what also happened was players weren't chumped out of profits per each sale of products with their name and or likeness on those products. This was revolutionary and continues to be the case today. No one wants to be taken advantage of, right? And let's say what it is. Big companies tend to take advantage of the little guy, regardless of whether they get the signing bonus or whatever. Big companies are out for big companies. It's just the way it is. That's part of human nature. And guys, this is one of the biggest issues creators are facing today online. Millions of us who create for a living show up every single day. We share our creative work on platforms we don't own. We give away our original content, and who profits in the end? Not the creators, unless in the few rare cases, people like Joe Rogan, for example, get a big fat deal from Spotify, or a particular person already had a huge audience and they bring it to their creative work online, and companies were willing to advertise with them. Otherwise, most creators are not being compensated for the work that we do. And this is a growing issue and a growing concern. As of this recording, guess what's happening? The Screen Actors Guild is on strike, as is the Writers Guild of America. And they are putting in very plain language to the big companies, the big entertainment companies, guys, you're not supporting us. We are not making a living here. So again, nothing new, just different clothes, different different tools to voice. But this story, Air, doesn't really dive into that particular idea, but it brushes across it. And I noticed it because as a creator, I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And it wasn't until the forces came together, and it wasn't easy. Michael Jordan's mother is the one that put that out there. She said, we're not signing unless Michael gets a piece of every product sold that has his name and or likeness on it. And no company had ever done that before. And Sonny Vaccaro actually fought against it. And almost you could see the tension. He's like, oh, well, we've never done that, Mrs. Jordan. And, he's still getting all this money and it's going to be great. And she's like, nope, these are my terms. You want my son, you're going to do this. And he got it done. So stories like Air show what's possible when we go all in. Nike won big. So did Jordan. So did the NBA. And so have thousands and thousands of people over the years because of job opportunities, because if you're a fan of the sport, you had a chance to enjoy seeing him play and all the great players since him. I feel so lucky. I actually went and I saw Michael Jordan play in person several times. Phenomenal, unbelievable human. That one deal ushered in an entirely new era of how things get done. And for this reason, I think the story is exceptional and worth talking about and worth thinking about. And it also makes me think of my recent conversation with John Gumas, who 35 years ago started an ad agency, took a big risk. He was going up against some of the big names in advertising, big names with giant piles of cash at their disposal, which he didn't have. But what he did have was belief in himself and his ability to solve problems. It's a terrific conversation. I'll put a link to it in the show notes page. If you have not listened to that conversation with me and John Gumas, please go back and listen to it after you're done listening to this one, because his story truly is inspirational and ties right in with what I've been talking about today. Believing in yourself and willing, to take a big bet. And as I bring this episode in for a landing, the biggest takeaway here for me is that ultimately, team, we have to bet on ourselves. And I guarantee you that even If it didn't actively cross his mind, Sonny Vaccaro knew at the end of the day that that's what he was doing. He was betting on himself. He was betting on his gut feeling that Jordan and only Jordan should sign with Nike, get the $250K, and then go from there. Because listen, if we aren't willing to bet on ourselves, no one else is. No one else is. That's played out numerous times for numerous people. It certainly has played out in my life, and I imagine it has played out in yours. So again, I want you to think about a time in your life right now. It could be as recent as yesterday. It could be years or decades ago. When did you bet on yourself and win? When did you bet on yourself and win? Think about that time right now. What were some of the circumstances leading up to making that bet? What was at stake for you? What could you have lost? This is the kind of idea leadership thrives on. Now, I'm not saying to go out and be foolish. I will insert my disclaimer here that this podcast is for educational purposes only. I am not a licensed mental health professional, nor am I a financial advisor. I am not advocating for anyone to do anything that is potentially harmful to themselves or to others without consulting proper professionals. Okay, always consult with others before taking on something risky. Sonny Vaccaro didn't behave in a vacuum. He was consulting with Rob Strasser. He was consulting with Phil Knight. He was consulting with other people in his life and on his team. And he also went to North Carolina and met one-on-one with Michael Jordan's mom. And after doing all that, he placed his bet. For each of us, at some point, we're going to face a decision where we are putting all our chips in, or we are walking away knowing we will either win or lose, right? There's no in between here. As leaders of our lives, first and foremost, and then as leaders in our careers, our families, our businesses, our communities, we are placing bets every single day, whether we are aware of it or not. I want you to be more aware of the bets you're placing on yourself, which is why I create episodes like this one and why I continue to have conversations with people who have placed bets on themselves too. Great stories continue to be great teachers. We can learn so much from each other, and we can learn from great films like Air, which tell a story about real people facing real challenges. Sonny Vaccaro was a visionary. He was an undervalued visionary. We're remembered for the risks we are willing to take. Remember that? We are remembered for thinking differently, for believing in something so deeply. We have no other choice but to see it through. Risks we take can be small, or they can be really, really huge, like what Sonny faced, betting it all on Jordan, going all in, putting in all our chips. Air is a beautiful film. It's well acted. It's a great story. And if you're like me and you love Oregon, there's some beautiful scenes of the Portland and Beaverton areas, which is where I spent all my time. Mount Hood and other mountains are featured in the film. They're just fantastic. The landscape out there just cannot be beat. And I loved the movie for that as well. And, whether you're a fan of Nike or not, this film is really worth watching because it's so much more than just Nike. It's really mostly about real people taking chances, believing in something, and, seeing it through. The thing about Phil Knight and his key executive team at that time in history, they were ready for the next step, even if they didn't know what that next step looked like. And that's leadership 101 right there. We'll never know what would have happened had Michael Jordan signed with one of the competitors, and I, for one, am glad about that. So that's it for today, team. Think about some times in your life when you took a big risk. How did it play out, whether you won or lost? Think about how different your life would be today had you not gone for it. There's a reason for everything, and everything happens for a reason, and I say celebrate it all. This is Mary Lou Kaiser. Thanks so much for listening. Remember, it is always a great day to get out there and play your position. That's the biggest bet you can make every single day, team. Catch you next time.
Here at the Play Your Position podcast, we believe that the road to self-mastery and a life well lived starts with answering the call to leadership. That's when the fun really begins. Send this episode to any friends who might need to hear the inspiration and ideas you heard today. And feel free to rate and review us on your favorite podcast platform.